Hello, my name's Kirsten Meneghello, and I'll be your guide today as we navigate best practices for how to develop an amazing leadership development program. Just wanted to say hello before I started sharing my slides. Welcome to Overthrow the Ordinary, a Rebel 7-step guide to transforming your leadership development program. Once upon a time, there was a group of leaders within an organization who were identified as high potential leaders and were invited to participate in their company's leadership development program. As part of this program, the participants were assigned to a learning action team. 5 people were assigned to each group. Each team was asked to solve a real-world business problem and then give a presentation to the executive team at the end of the program. This company was in manufacturing and had manufacturing operations spread across 3 different countries. The team's project assignment was to research and recommend tracking software that would allow their global headquarters to identify where a particular part was all throughout the manufacturing process. So the learning action team met to solve this problem for about half a day each week for over 6 months. Eventually, they identified a vendor that had developed software that would be a good fit for their needs. But as the date of their presentation neared, they were told that, in addition to the entire executive team attending their presentation, that the other participants in the program would also be attending, so a whole bunch of their peers. In addition, the board of directors from the East Coast would be flying in to catch their presentation as well. So all of a sudden, the stakes were really high. They also were told they'd only have 20 minutes for their presentation, which seemed entirely too short given the nature and complexity of the problem that they had been asked to solve and the data they needed to share to support their proposed solution. The director of Learning and Development Department told them that the point of these presentations was to share what they learned personally through their 12-month leadership journey in the program. So the focus was supposed to be on their own leadership growth. But then when members of the team had individual conversations with members of the executive team, as they often did in their day-to-day roles in the business, it was clear that the executives wanted them to focus on the actual business solution they were proposing. So now they're in a situation where they're being told 2 different things from two different stakeholders. And when members of this learning action team asked what the format of the presentation should be, so they got 20 minutes, what do you want us to present on and what format? They were just told, do whatever you want. It was just way too open-ended. And so the team that I was working with was struggling with, should it be like a traditional PowerPoint presentation, a video of the tracking software in action? Could we do like an academic white paper, or like maybe a specific implementation execution plan of the new software? What exact format do they want? So this resulted in a lot of frustration. It was clear from an outsider's perspective, my perspective, that there was no alignment between the executive team, board members, and the learning and development department that was running this program about what the deliverables were to be. Each group had different expectations, and the participants were lost in limbo, grasping for clarity. Also, the presentation length of only 20 minutes seemed to be really disproportionate to the amount of time the team had spent over the course of 6 months. The team members were also concerned about what other teams were going to be presenting. They had no idea what they were up against in terms of other teams' formats too. So would they come up short in comparison? So even though this was supposed to be a capstone project showing and displaying all that they had learned and accomplished throughout the course of this 12-month program, instead it was totally a pressure cooker situation with way too much stress involved. And overall, instead of being a crowning achievement showcasing what they had learned, it was just a frustrating and demoralizing experience. But it doesn't have to be that way. So today, my goal is to share mistakes that I've seen and witnessed in leadership development programs like these to help you create an effective, engaging, and out-of-the-ordinary program for your leaders. And here are the 7 steps we're going to be focusing on today. First, we're going to identify program goals and objectives. What is it that you're trying to accomplish with your program? Second, we're going to make sure that you align and engage with your executive team so you're all on the same page. You want to make sure that the participants' managers understand their role in the program, if they have a role at all. How can they be supporting their direct reports, which are the participants in the program? You want to clearly define action team project deliverables. If you choose for the participants to be involved in team projects, we got to really clearly spell out what we want them to do. Step 5, we want to make sure that learning modules and any training workshop materials you use reflect practical skills that they'll need to be more effective leaders and business realities. Step 6, you want to provide support through coaching and mentoring that may become from internal places or from external providers. And finally, step 7, we'll want to think through where and how participants will be having career development discussions, because trust me, they will want to have them, and we have to think through and anticipate what they may need in that area so we can create and make sure that they've got a space to do that. Also, I'd like to encourage you right now to grab a pen and paper to jot some notes down as we go along, or to open a file on your computer and take some notes there. I'm going to ask you to reflect on some action steps along the way and want to be sure that you're ready to do that. Because we're doing this in a virtual format, it's not ideal. We're not being able to do it face-to-face in a workshop in small groups. Instead, I want to pause and allow you to incorporate and reflect on some of the learnings as we go too. So why is it important that we invest time and energy to create effective leadership programs? Because according to a recent LinkedIn study, an astounding 94% of employees would stay at a company longer if it invested in their careers and provided development opportunities. So having a robust leadership development program is a big developmental opportunity that most employees would relish being a part of. Let me tell you a little bit about myself and why I'm speaking on this subject today. I'm the founder of Illumination Coaching, a leadership and team development consultancy based in Portland. I'm active in my local SHRM chapter, which is PERMA, for those of you that are also PERMA members, hello. And I'm on the board of ICF Oregon, which is the local chapter of the Global International Coaching Federation, which is a governing body for professional coaches worldwide. I've supported many large corporate leadership development programs as both a coach and workshop facilitator. So I've seen a lot of what's worked and what hasn't over the years. One program I supported was a year-long program for a large global apparel manufacturer. There are usually 20 to 30 leaders annually that go through the program. Participants are selected through a very competitive process out of hundreds of applicants from around the world. And I worked with the learning and development department leaders on this program as one of the coaches on the team, and got to see the program evolve over the course of 4 years and how it was rolled out and received by 4 separate cohorts. Another program I was a part of was for an automotive parts manufacturer with plants in the US, Mexico, and China. And for their program, they actually handpicked 15 high potential leaders from different parts of the business: engineering, finance, supply chain, and marketing, to be part of the program. In addition to supporting these larger corporate programs, I also assist mid-sized organizations in creating their own programs from scratch. And I earned a certificate on creating leadership development programs from ATD, the Association for Talent Development. And that's why I'm bringing you the real scoop today. So let's turn to you and your organization. I'd like for you to reflect on where your organization is on this continuum in terms of experience and sophistication with leadership development programs. Maybe you work at an organization that's already very experienced at designing and executing these programs. So you're on one end of the spectrum. Some of you may be on the other end, where your company doesn't have a program in place and really doesn't know where to begin to create something like this. My hope is that no matter where you fall on this continuum, you will get some good takeaways and thoughts about potential action steps after you leave today. Also, based on where you fall on this continuum, I want you to set realistic expectations for what you can create and implement. You'll have to consider how much time, resources, budget, staffing, and expertise you already have to allocate to building a leadership development program. For example, if you're an HR department of one, then creating and executing a program with all the bells and whistles is probably not in the cards. This is not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. Instead, I will offer considerations and things to think about that will help you wherever you're at and take it up a notch. All right, step one. We're going to start by identifying program goals and objectives. Let's begin with the end in mind. What are the outcomes your organization wants to achieve from this program? One way of thinking about this is to consider what are the top 3 business challenges that your organization is going to face in the next 5 to 10 years? What external changes are on the horizon that may alter the requirements of leadership in your organization? Could be things like tech advances, competition, regulatory changes, industry trends. What emerging issues and problems are on the horizon that will require unique leadership skills? And then how do we address and equip those leaders with the knowledge, skills, and tools in order to address them? It's important to align the talent that we already have in-house with these needed competencies going forward. And also, a big part of this program may be to engage leadership at all levels of the organization. How can we have that alignment and that buy-in about why leadership is important just across the board? A recent case study that was featured in a training and development magazine featured a leadership development effort that was rolled out by Dell Tech, an IT company based in Virginia. I'll share the link to the article at the end of our session today so you can check it out. Dell Tech provides IT solutions and services for project-based businesses. And in 2014, they took stock of their growth and anticipated doubling their workforce within 5 years. And sure enough, they grew from 1,500 employees then, 2014, to over 3,000 employees today. So they doubled their size in only 6 years. And given the growth that they were anticipating, the global learning team wanted to successfully address the challenges they knew they were ahead. So they asked themselves, how could we align our talent base with the competencies needed to drive the business towards its goals? What methods would we use to prepare our leaders for these real-world business issues? And how would we engage existing leaders and foster a broader culture of healthy leadership at all levels of the company? In order to do this, they created a steering committee comprised of executives who had a passion for development. And then they created competencies for 3 different levels of leadership. They started with the director level, manager, and then individual contributor. In this way, they were able to reach and impact leadership at all levels of the organization. But those different levels of leadership had different needs and different leadership competencies associated with them. And so therefore, they had to create programs that met those particular needs and closed those gaps. So here are some considerations for you to think about when you begin your planning for your own organization. First, I encourage you to interview various stakeholders at different levels to gain their perspective on what's working and not working in terms of leadership development. So you've got your own perspective, whether you're, wherever you are in the HR world in your organization as director or supporting an HR function. And so you've got your own perspective, but by interviewing and finding out other people's perspective, you get a more holistic view of how leadership is being developed within your organization. Then think about what levels of leaders you will want to address with your program. So again, if you have a sophisticated program in place, maybe you already have multiple programs that are addressing different levels of leadership. If you're beginning just at this is your first iteration, I encourage you to think about what level of leadership is going to be the most impactful and is something that we can actually implement, right? Maybe it's a pilot program for a particular level of leadership. Then take a look at your organization's leadership competencies. Do you have a description of how your ideal leader shows up and the behaviors that they demonstrate? If you don't have that already, then maybe that would be a good first step for you to identify your standard leadership competencies and to create some consensus on what those are throughout your organization. And when you do that, it's important not to just consider competencies for today, but for leaders tomorrow. or in 5 years down the road too. So leadership competencies that are meeting today's needs and future needs as well. Then you can turn to thinking about what elements of the program you want to include. So if you're going to have a robust 12-month program with all the bells and whistles, maybe it looks like it's 3 or 4 full days offsite in workshops, with a big presentation at the end, with a mentorship component and a 360 review. It's this like big, robust program. You're going to require more complex and multiple elements versus maybe a smaller quarter-long program, like it's half day each month over the course of 3 months with some online learning modules and kind of a reflection at the end. So kind of a less robust program, a more simplified one, that's going to require different elements that you think through too. So these kind of all have to be, the elements of your program have to reflect the level of time and energy and commitment and sophistication of the people in the program and the sophistication of your organization and where it's at in its own maturity too. And remember, this is not a one and done kind of thing. Usually most organizations will start by launching a program, and then after that first cohort's gone through and that we've had that first iteration, we measure and assess what has worked and what hasn't. We use that feedback and input to improve the program when we launch version 2.0. In one program I was involved with for over 4 years, I saw a lot of changes in each iteration of the program. So for example, they started out at the beginning and they gave every leader a 360 assessment report that was kind of mandatory at the beginning. And then in the next iteration, they realized that was like way too much information like off the bat. And so they decided instead to use an emotional intelligence report at the beginning, help people kind of create like that baseline level of emotional self-awareness. And then the 360 was administered at the end of the program. So, you know, those kinds of things shift and change over time as you actually see how the participants in the program respond to things. And in that first iteration, the example I just gave, the 360 feedback right off the bat really was intimidating for some of the participants. So the company said, okay, we're gonna shift this and move this to the end of the program and make sure that participants are ready to be in a place even to receive that feedback. In addition, over time, the challenges that the business is facing is going to change too. And so the program should reflect stresses, challenges, real life issues that the business is facing as well. Again, your program does not exist in a vacuum. It exists within a culture and within real life, the real world, right? So your program has to reflect those things that are happening in a larger business arena. One company that I work with had hired management consultants to evaluate and scrutinize every process and procedure within the business in order to make it more effective. And that was happening outside of this program. But the level of scrutiny was heightened in every department in the company. And you could just feel that additional stress and pressure that people were dealing with in their regular work lives kind of flowing into the program. And so as a coach for that program, myself and the other coaches, we had a lot of conversations with the participants about how to deal with stress and self-care during that time, because the participants were simply overwhelmed with their regular workload, this additional like management consultant efficiency process, and then their engagement in the program. It just felt like a lot, right? So those are some considerations for you to keep in mind. And here are some suggestions or a menu of options for you to consider with regard to some potential program elements you may want to incorporate in your own program. So this is just a few things, but you might want to think about if you want to include an assessment. So assessments come in a couple different flavors. They can be in a self-assessment like Myers-Briggs, an everything DISC, like Strength Finders, or an EQI, emotional intelligence assessment. They might be assessments from others where you're asking for feedback from the participants' managers, or they engage in a 360 feedback process, whether it's interview or an online report. You might encourage your participants to do some self-directed study online, give them a directory of resources podcasts, articles, LinkedIn learning modules, either before or between live training sessions so they can work at their own pace. And more we're finding that these kind of micro learning bursts are super helpful for people. You might want to include some group training modules delivered live in a workshop format. I found that that's kind of like the bread and butter of leadership development programs. And if they're done well in terms of the content and the facilitation, they can be really very powerful. Of course, these days we're not doing many live workshops, but certainly online can be just as engaging. Another element might be to ask each participant to create their own individual leadership development plan. That is also a very valuable element where leaders take some form of assessment and then they identify goals that they want to work on for their own leadership that's happening in tandem, in parallel through this process, create some focus for them. But very often I see that's not, they're not supported in that plan. So you have to give them tools and resources in order to do that effectively. Something else to consider is to have some folks from your executive team come in and speak about their own leadership journey, or to speak about the area of the business that they oversee, so that participants in the program get a sense for how other leaders have evolved in their journey. I think that can be really inspirational and motivational for people to hear that. And it's a chance for executives to be vulnerable and share their own learning journey and leadership journey. You might offer stretch assignments or shadowing into other parts of the business where people can rotate into other departments, or if they've identified, let's say a leader participant identifies they want to increase their business acumen, really understand like how to read P&L, income statements. Maybe they are paired with or mentored with someone in finance department that can help them build those kind of business acumen muscles. Another important element is coaching. And this can come out through a number of ways. You may offer that each participant in the program has a set amount of coaching sessions that they have either with an internal coach or provided or matched with an external coach that they can use and access during the session. Maybe they get one coaching session a month or a coaching session that follows a workshop training. You can also create peer coaching circles where the participants in the program get to practice their coaching with one another, and they get to synthesize the learning that they're getting out of the training modules. You can also have the coaches work with groups and project teams. So there's an ability to work with the groups, coach the groups for learning in that way too. You can also pair participants with mentors within the company or a past participant from the leadership development program. There's also the opportunity to assign the participants to groups for learning action projects where they'll have a chance to put their new leadership knowledge and skills to work on a large scale or a small scale project. I think it's also important to give folks some case studies where they can really like learn and see how some of these skills and behaviors and mindsets are applied, give them a chance to work through some of those things. It's also nice to offer social and fun interactions for the participants, whether it's happy hour, golf, karaoke, other social outings to get to know each other. And again, we can create virtual social engagement as well. And there's a huge benefit that comes from leaders getting to know other leaders within the organization, especially in departments they maybe wouldn't normally work with. There's just a lot of long-term connection that can happen there too. And finally, some kind of assessment at the end, thinking about how are you going to wrap this whole thing up? How are you going to help leaders assess their own, development towards the development goals they've identified for themselves? How are you going to measure success for the program as a whole? Do you want to offer some kind of graduation ceremony? Do you want to help the participants celebrate their success and what they've done along the way? Would they share that with their managers? What does that look like too? So as you can see, there are a whole bunch of different elements that you can pick and choose from as part of your program. And again, if you're starting out small, this, this is way too much to be included, but think about like what's going to give you the most bang for your buck. And based on your outcomes, what are going to be the most meaningful program elements that are going to really help your participants improve these competencies too. All right, so now I told you you'd have a chance to reflect. Get out that pen and paper, open up that Word document, and jot some notes down about what you're going to take away from this first step, which is identify program goals and objectives. So I want you to think about what levels of leaders will you focus on developing in your organization? What are your desired outcomes for that leadership contingent? If you haven't already, think about how you will go about developing your organization's leadership competencies. Again, that's a huge, really important first step in all of this. And then from there, what are the program elements that will be absolutely essential for you to offer? Others might be nice to have, but some are going to be essential from the get-go. So at this point, I'll give you about 20 seconds so you can reflect on that. All right, step 2. Now it's important to engage and align with your executive team. It's important to create alignment with your senior leadership and make sure they buy into the leadership development strategy that you've created. So it's great that you and your team have developed these awesome plans for a new program, but it's really all for nothing if your executive team isn't on board. So before you get too far down the road, I encourage you to discuss potential plans with your team. Ideally, you will develop your program in conjunction with your executive team. Because if not, you're going to find yourself in a position of having to sell it to them and justify and defend your own thinking. And that's just a lot more work that would be easier avoided if you align with them right from the start. So here are some questions to consider and for you to talk about with your executive team. What are the current drivers that are motivating the desire or need for investing time and energy into developing leaders at our organization right now? What's driving this desire to do it? It could be that you need to develop a pipeline of future leaders. Or maybe the skill set of your current leaders doesn't align with the long-term strategic goals of your organization and where you want it to go. So there might be a gap there. There may be a desire to increase diversity within leadership, not just in terms of gender or race, but in terms of diversity of thought, communication style, and approaches to problem solving. Maybe you want to address high turnover rates. People aren't staying at your organization because the leaders just aren't effective and aren't doing a good job of making people feel engaged and motivated. You also want to talk with your executive team about what are the risks if we don't invest in developing our leaders. If we just continue on with the status quo, what's going to happen to our organization? You want to have some data that supports the business case for developing leaders. You can use stats and surveys like the one I shared earlier with you about 94% of employees wanting development opportunities, or a whole bunch of resources out there like HCI, ATD, Center for Creative Leadership. They collected data on this, and you can just find that and share that with your team about why this is important. Also think about who are your allies in the C-suite who can be advocates and help tell the story about the value of developing leaders. Are there executives that are already development minded, who they themselves have an executive coach, they have a growth mindset, and they're always in a place of learning and challenging themselves? They may be really good allies to engage in this effort. A challenge that I have often seen in these programs is that the participants in the program learn all these great new skills, like learning how to employ a strategic mindset, how to be a better coach, how to create psychological safety and trust on a team. And then they look up into the ranks of the C-suite and they don't see any of those leadership behaviors exhibited there, or maybe some, but certainly not all. And there's a gap, and it's plain as day. And what happens is that participants in the program get disillusioned. They think, we're learning these skills and applying them, but we don't see our executives doing this. At one company, some of the participants said this outright to me, and it resulted in them thinking very poorly about the quality of leadership at the company, since the leaders that they interacted with weren't following the best practices that they had learned in the program. So the end result was that instead of encouraging high potential leaders to stick around and be a part of the succession plan for upper management, instead it had an opposite chilling effect. And the participants wondered if they wanted to invest energy in developing their careers at this company. So you can imagine, like, it totally could backfire, right? Here you are wanting to develop these high potential people, thinking that they're going to be great leaders of tomorrow. And they're thinking, I don't know if I want to stick around this place. So an important consideration is, will the executives model the behaviors that you're teaching the participants in the program? If not, how are you going to close that gap? So one place to start is maybe folks at the executive level in the C-suite need to engage in some of their own executive coaching. And maybe that's a good first step, along with identifying those leadership competencies we've talked about, rather than rolling out a fancy development program right now. Maybe your organization's not in a place where they can do that. Maybe there's some pre-work that needs to happen too. So now that I've given you some food for thought for step number 2, engage and align with your executive team, I'd like to ask you to take a moment and think about what is your biggest obstacle to getting your executive team aligned with your vision, and how are you going to create that vision together? How will you address this? So I'll give you a few seconds here. All right, step 3, ensure the participants' managers understand their role. I feel like this is a major blind spot for a lot of programs. No one thinks about keeping the managers of the participants in the program in the loop with what's going on inside the program. But how can a manager support the learning and growth of their direct reports that are in the program when they don't even know what's happening? Recently, I was hired to develop and roll out a development program on a very tight timeline. The HR director knew what he wanted in terms of the program elements and basically just hired me to implement it. However, there was no plan to onboard the participant's manager due to the tight time frame. When I brought this up, we agreed that at a minimum, we would at least communicate the topics we were covering with each session and share the training materials the participants received with their managers as well. So we let them know that they should learn about in addition, we let them know that they should learn about the leadership development plans their employees were creating in the program as well. So just stayed in the loop. But as a result, there wasn't nearly as much engagement between the participants and their managers as there could have been if we had onboarded them properly. So some best practices are: educate managers about the program, who's involved, what topics you're going to cover, and what are the different elements. So if the participants are going to receive a 360, that their managers know that's going to happen, right? Oh, obviously they'll be giving feedback on the 360, but if they're going to be developing an individual development plan, what is a manager's role in that? Should they be aligning with their manager on it? Should they be reviewing it? Should they be touching base with them on a regular basis? Just kind of explaining what those elements of the program are. We also want to get the managers engaged and excited about developing their employees. We want to ask for their support of the program, because if the managers don't support it and they think it's a stupid idea, they're not going to give their employees time to really invest in the program. They will poo-poo it, they'll downplay it. So we want to make sure the managers are supporting their participants' engagement in the program and making sure that this is a priority. I encourage the managers to check in on a regular basis with the participants about the progress towards the goals that they had identified, and for the manager to give them feedback on their goals during their regular one-on-one meetings that they should hopefully be having anyway. The managers could ask about what their direct reports are learning in the program and how they're applying these new skills, right? Like, how are you trying them out? What's working, what's not working? Again, important to give the participants time, just attend the workshops, program events, and any time they need to work on these learning action team projects, if that's going to be an element of your program. And to just as a whole cut them some slack, because very often these leaders are already high performing leaders. They're already doing a lot of work. They're already superstars in what they do. And they go the extra mile. And then in addition to having all this additional work in the program, just for the managers to be understanding of all the pressures and things that the participants are juggling too. So those are a number of reasons why it's really important for there to be alignment with the participants and the managers. And I want you to think about how you will be doing that in your program. How will you inform managers about the program so they know what's going on? How will you engage them in the beginning and throughout the process? And ask for their support of the participants. In a perfect world, I think it'd be great to do an onboarding with all the managers together, where you have a chance to kind of roll out the program elements, the timeline, and be really clear about how you expect the managers to be involved, to proactively ask for their commitment, and then have a chance to answer their questions. If they have any concerns, that it's a dialogue as well, and you really understand what their concerns are too, instead of just having it be a one-way communication. So I'll give you about 20 seconds here to reflect on how you're going to enroll and keep your managers in the loop with your program. All right, step 4, clearly define action project team deliverables. So some of you in your program may have these action project teams or action learning projects. They're called a couple different things, but it's this idea, action learning is a powerful leadership development process in which the participants work on specifically designed project teams. And the point of the project is to incorporate these lessons learned from the formal training and give them an opportunity to apply a new skill, mindset, or behavior, and also as another opportunity to demonstrate their leadership within these groups. So the purpose of these action project teams is application. Unfortunately, many action learning team projects suffer from poor planning and can result in quite disappointing experiences for participants. So again, this is not for everyone, but for those of you that are going to have this element of programs, just want you to be aware of some things to kind of look out for, set them up for success. As I shared in the beginning story, the project teams were never given clear expectations on what their deliverables were in terms of a final presentation. There was no alignment between the learning and development team that had set up the program and the executives, which had a much different expectation in mind. So while the deliverables of the actual project or presentation should be clear, the best path forward should be unclear in order to allow participants to be challenged with complex, ambiguous problems, much like we deal with day to day, where there's no clear answer. I mean, just think about all the challenges we face this year with COVID, shifting economic realities, and racial equity discussions. None of these challenges has a clear, easy to solve answer. In fact, we're in the midst of all of them still. We haven't maybe seen our way through some of these things. So we want to challenge our leaders in that way too. I also want you to think through what the organization is going to do with the final product of these projects. So if you're asking a team to solve a real world problem that your business is actually facing, and then they take time to do it, they invest emotionally and time and energy into it, and then at the end, they present it to leadership, and then the leadership doesn't do anything with it, they mothball it, they don't implement anything, they don't recommend anything, they don't review anything. It's like, from the participant standpoint, like, what's the point of this? Why are we even engaging in this? So I encourage you to either make their projects kind of like theoretical, so that it's clear that it's an exercise, or make it something real and tangible that the organization can really take action on. Because if not, again, you're just going to demotivate people when they've spent 6 months on finding a vendor and a solution, and then it's just their suggestion is disregarded by the execs. Decide if you want to have the teams conduct a study and make recommendations, or if you want them to actually lead, change, and execute the initiative all the way through. Those are two different expectations too. Just making recommendations, or is there that expectation that, like, if their recommendation is approved by the C-suite, that they're going to be able to implement it? And that involves their time and energy as well. Some leaders might be in a position to want to do that and have time to do that, and others may not. So again, setting up expectations at the beginning is super big deal, so everyone's aligned on that too. So here are some considerations if you want to have your teams work on projects within these programs. So first, you really want to be clear about the project scope. I've seen a lot of scope creep where projects were defined as one thing, and then over time they snowball and become a lot more involved than they needed to be. One team took it to the nth degree. They basically produced a short movie. They had props. They had matching t-shirts printed, and they were on a stage, mic'd up. And it was like this Hollywood presentation. And I felt like it was this huge production, and it was probably a lot more than what they needed to deliver. Another team that I worked with ended up taking time to fly down to a manufacturing plant in another country in order to learn and understand the current plant processes that were going on there. That took them away from their day job for 3 days, their regular jobs. That's a huge time commitment, and something that some teams and managers understand and some don't. In fact, I had a lot of pushback from managers of that team going, why are our leaders doing this right now? So, and in that case, the project scope got way too big, right? It kind of took on a life of its own. We also want to think about the format. So what format do you want your presentations or projects to be presented in? Do you want them to give a formal presentation? Do you want them to develop a white paper, a go-to-market strategy, an implementation plan? Maybe you want them to create a video or a handbook, something like that. Be clear on what it is that they're delivering. Also, define milestones along the way. For example, you might let them know that at the end of the first month, you want them to identify potential solutions to the problems they've been given. The second month, they should identify their preferred solution. And then the third month, they are supposed to write up a 2-page executive summary. So by kind of sharing, this is where you should be along in the process, it will also help to keep the teams on track and keep the scope to a narrower scope that it really might be setting them up more for success, right? Also think about, if you've got multiple action teams, how are you going to score or rank results? Will there be some kind of scoring or feedback that are given to the participants after they do the presentation? Will the one person or team be crowned the winner? Will the projects be rated according to some kind of scoring score sheet or rubric? If so, the rubric should be shared far in advance at the beginning when these projects are assigned, so the teams build their project with those in mind. So you could potentially evaluate presentations based on a whole host of items, right? Like maybe the quality of the presentation skills and their executive presence, how creative or original their idea is, how they use data to support their idea, how persuasive they are, how much they demonstrate concepts that they learned in the program. So again, tying it back to the sense of why are we doing this? Like strategic mindset, things like that. Like how are they showing strategy and building a strategy in their program, in their project? How practical is it for their suggestion or solution to be implemented? Maybe the impact on the financial health or organizational health of the business, customer engagement, employee engagement, things like that. There's just think about all the different ways we can measure the quality of this project and whether or not, what does success look like? I think it's super important we state all that at the outset, So again, teams know what they're shooting for. Also, do you want to have executive sponsors give input or mentor some of these teams? So will you assign a leader to each team for mentorship or support? Will you just identify these people are available if your team needs support in a particular business area to reach out and give them feedback? How will you identify and assign them to the teams? How often will the executive sponsor meet? What's the expectation there? Will they meet regularly to give feedback? Or will they just be generally available and on call? Will they help to prepare for final presentations? So if they're going to be giving a stand-up presentation, will they do a run-through with the executive sponsor, and will the sponsor give them feedback? That all presumes that your sponsor is in a position to give them feedback. Does a sponsor have those skills, and like especially around presentation skills, where they can really honestly are in a position to give those teams feedback? I don't know. We'll want to make sure that's all aligned. We also want to make sure the sponsors have the availability to help, resources to share, and solid coaching mentoring skills. So you can see, just even determining whether or not you want to have executive sponsors involved, a lot of considerations here. And then time allocated for preparation and delivery. Make sure that what the team has been asked to do and prepare throughout the program in terms of time and effort is in line with the final presentation format and length. It's also helpful to specify and allow time for prototype reviews and presentation dress rehearsals. Giving the teams opportunity for feedback and course correction will set them up for success too. So once again, it's your turn to reflect on what kinds of projects or presentations will you incorporate in your program. If you have an idea about what format or deliverables you definitely would want or not want, it's helpful to jot those down. And then how much time do you expect for people to commit to this program and the learning action team process? Really think about the amount of time they're spending and how much benefit it is to them as leaders and to the company as a whole. So I'll give you some time here. Now we're moving to step 5. It's important to have learning modules that reflect practical skills and realities. So in order to be effective at this step, we're going to have to rewind and look back at step number 1. Let's revisit what are the competencies that we're wanting to enhance and develop in our leaders. And to do that, we have to think about competencies in terms of skills, behaviors, and mindsets that actually support these competencies. Like, how do these competencies show up, right? And then we want our learning modules to be a reflection of them. Our learning and training content has got to support the development of these skills, behaviors, and mindsets of the leadership competencies we are wanting. They have to be related and aligned. So one mistake I've seen is that programs often rely on a lot of traditional classroom lecture type workshops with talking heads, and that's just not going to get it done. We have to create interactive experiences that allow us to practice a new skill or mindset. So for example, thinking about like a growth versus fixed mindset, and then practice it again and again in order to build that muscle and then feel competent to actually go out and use it. Skills like leading change, being agile, creating psychological safety and trust on teams, having a strategic mindset, developing coaching skills are not something you can develop by reading an article or watching a 10-minute video on. It's just not going to happen. So we really have to think through the user experience here, the participant in the program, and how our leaders, how do we get them to engage with these concepts, play with them, practice them, kind of like just engage with these ideas, right? And really see them through. So we also don't want to use canned content or recycled training information from a while ago. We really have to customize our content so it reflects your organization's leadership development strategy and your culture. So I witnessed a team building activity at one company. I was just there as a witness. And the teams were asked to build a tower out of random building materials they were given to illustrate how to communicate and problem solve as a team. But the whole activity was not debriefed well by the facilitator after it was done. So it felt like the activity wasn't really tied to a concrete learning objective, but it just turned out to be like a fun activity. And I left there as, someone in my field going, I wonder what the participants really got out of that experience, right? It just felt like a one-off thing that wasn't really tied to, okay, what did we learn from this and how are we going to apply it going forward? We also want to avoid flashy, trendy training programs that aren't tied to your learning objectives, but it's like the latest flavor that everybody's into, right? But again, let's tie it back to what you're trying to build in terms of competencies of your leaders. So not against having fun or trying out new things. In fact, many of us learn through the act of play, but it's got to be related to what you're helping them trying to help them learn. We also want to avoid going with someone's favorite activity, model, or approach if it's not right for your program. So we all have our favorite go-tos, right? Maybe you love situational leadership theory, SLT, by Ken Blanchard, or Strength Finders, or DISC. Those are all great things. But again, how are they aligned with our program's objectives? Let's just not do it because we've always done it or because that's Kathy's favorite thing to do. Also think about what programs or assessments are already a part of your culture you can build upon and incorporate. So I've seen one company use an assessment really effectively throughout their organization. I'd say about 80% of their employees had taken this insights assessment, which has 4 different colors, like different personality styles. And if you walk in any person's office, you will see the 4 color like Duplo Lego blocks in different colors in their office that show what style they have. And so most people in the organization know the style of their colleagues, their insight style. So when you've got an organization that already has this kind of shared language or culture that has already been embedded, like it's great to build upon that shared knowledge within your program. So you can talk about in the program maybe how you lead the different insight styles, maybe have the leaders in the program identify the insight styles in their team and how they are going to lead each of those folks differently and lead the team as a whole based on the group's insights styles that are present on the team. So things like that, you've already got that in place. It's a great opportunity to leverage and take advantage of things like that. Also, think about who's going to deliver the training. If you hire vendors or consultants, how will you ensure that they incorporate real-life examples and challenges your business is facing, and not show up with some plain vanilla training material that's not applicable either to your industry or your organization right now? Recently, I developed a curriculum for a leadership development light program for about 7 directors in a smallish consulting company in conjunction with the HR director. As part of the program, each of the leaders received 360 feedback right at the start. Once the 360 reports came back, we looked at the group's aggregate leadership strengths and opportunities for development, and then we tweaked the curriculum in order to meet their needs. So think about where this particular cohort is at and where are their gaps with regard to your organization's leadership competencies. All right, your turn to reflect. Think through your learning modules and how they will reflect practical skills and realities. How will you determine what gaps exist, behaviors, and mindsets amongst this particular cohort? How will your training modules support these new mindsets, behaviors, and skills, especially around social and emotional skill building? I'll give you a few minutes. Okay, we're turning to step 6 now. Provide support through coaching and mentoring. It's not realistic to think that participants will attend a 3-hour workshop on coaching skills and then think they're going to head back to their team and be this amazing coach to their own direct reports. These communication and interpersonal skills are nuanced, and they take time and a lot of practice to perfect. So I suggest that you build into your program a way for participants to be paired with a coach in order to practice and explore how they'll implement what they learned in their training program. Participants in one program learned about a model for giving feedback in a workshop, and it was called the SBI model. But in talking with some of the participants, it was clear that they were not sure how to apply this SBI model to an actual feedback conversation they needed to have with one of their direct reports. So as a coach, I was able to help them break down the individual elements, situation, behavior, impact, SBI, and create talking points for a discussion they wanted to have later that week. But it would have been so much more effective if the participants had had the chance to craft these talking points in the workshop and then maybe set them up with a partner and talk through their script, get feedback from the other person, refine their script, work with another partner, kind of do this a few times through so they felt comfortable with it, they could polish it up, and get feedback about what was working well, not working well, maybe do a role play in front of the room with a facilitator, get some feedback from the facilitator. That was really a missed opportunity. So if we want participants to use the skills they're learning in training, whether online or live, we've got to give them a way to work through them with either using a coach or a mentor. And I found that some of the conversations I've had with participants I was coaching in the program included things like, outside of these, like how you apply these skills, things like how to manage up when their manager wasn't demonstrating the skills that they were learning in the program, how to improve their executive presence and influence in order to be more persuasive in their role at all, how to give them resources to support the goals that they had identified themselves in their own personal leadership development plan. Now that they've identified these goals, like to be have a more strategic mindset, how would they go about doing that? So we would talk through that in the coaching. And I also gave them a safe space to talk through other leadership challenges they were facing with their team, like day to day. A mentor can also be an extremely helpful support system for participants. Mentors can be identified from leaders who were in a previous cohort through the program. Maybe they have knowledge in a particular area of the business that the participant wants to learn more about. Or maybe they're invested in their own growth and development, and the mentor can be a champion and role model for a participant in that way. So take a minute and think about what support kind of in parallel, in conjunction with the other elements that you've developed for your program, you're going to offer. Will you offer coaching and mentoring? Will these come from internal sources or external? And what's going to be the expectation in terms of how the participants can tap into these resources? So take a few seconds here and jot some notes down. All right, we're in the home stretch. Step 7, create forums for career development discussions. Inevitably, participants will want to have conversations about their career path within the organization. Maybe they're thinking, what's next for me? Or I'm excited about moving into more of an operations or a supply chain role. How do I do that? You'll find that they're looking for someone to have a career pathing conversation with. They will want confirmation and encouragement about their future at the company. Here's the bad news though. Even though this is what most participants are looking for, most managers are not equipped to have these conversations. Even if participants reach out to their manager, they often go nowhere. And I know because I've heard this time and time again as a coach. Their manager may be unable or afraid to have these conversations. So what happens, for example, if the participant wants to be considered to backfill their current manager's role once their manager is promoted? Some managers may feel threatened by this. Or they might be motivated to keep their star performer in their current role because they do such a great job. Other managers don't know what career paths are even available within the company, so they don't bring up these discussions. And if the participant brings them up, they could be dismissed by the manager or shut down. And I think this is often out of fear, or that the manager doesn't have an answer and so they just won't engage in these discussions. In one program I was coaching, 2 participants reported to the same manager, and their manager had recently been promoted to the chief marketing officer role. Now that he was in a more demanding role, he had no time to have regular one-on-one discussions with them to support them, let alone make time for career planning discussions. They both felt very unsupported and disillusioned by having a boss that was basically MIA. And again, these are high potential leaders. They're important to engage and make them feel like worthwhile and worthy and like, we believe in you, right? For the long-term success of the company. But instead they felt isolated and struggled to determine a path forward. So I encourage them to tap into resources in HR and learning and development to support them. So I'm letting you know it's important for your organization to figure out how to meet these participant needs. It's not a question of if they will ask for the support. It's only a question of how and when. And even if they're not bringing it up, they're thinking it. I guarantee it. So some potential options for you are, first, think about training your managers about how to have these conversations. That's not just important for participants in these programs, but just overall teams and for employees as a whole, right? I feel like that's something our organizations have not done well, is train managers about how to have these career discussions with their employees. Second, you can encourage participants as an alternative to reach out to HR, either the director or HR business partner, to have these conversations if the manager is unable or unwilling to do it. And also maybe the HR person can help facilitate a 3-way conversation with them and their manager if the manager is really shy about this. You can also make these career pathing discussions a formal part of the program itself, maybe towards the end. Where do you go from here? Give participants a structure for identifying potential paths, and then resources in order to have these discussions and make their desires known so they feel supported in their goal to move up within the organization. And not always move up, and maybe it's move into a different department, you know. So I want to be clear here that no program I have ever been involved with offers this. This is such a big opportunity, and you would get huge gold stars if you incorporated this and thought through this as part of your program. I feel like it's such a big missed opportunity. So I really encourage you to think through, how are we going to help these leaders and participants in the program have these discussions? So finally, it's your chance to reflect on, how are you going to determine what our leaders need in terms of career development discussions? And how can we do that? How can we create forums and safe places for them to have these discussions? Please take some time to reflect here. Okay, now it's time to wrap up all we've learned today and make this actionable so you're set up for success. Where will you go from here? I've given you a lot of food for thought and considerations to take into account in order to either build or enhance your leadership development programs. I'd like you to start by identifying 3 action steps that you're going to take from today's workshop. Put them in order in which you'll do them. So what's first, what's second, what's third? And finally, assign a due date to each of these tasks. And I'd like to give you an example before I give you time. So let's say you decide that getting executive buy-in is a place to start because you have no existing development program in place. So in order to do that, your 1, 2, 3 items might look like this. Step 1, review resources from today's presentation and my notes. Step 2, sketch out a broad proposal to share with the executive team, kind of this broad brushstroke your vision for what this could potentially look like in a program in your organization. And third, schedule a meeting with key stakeholders to begin discussions and determine their level of interest in even implementing a program. So I'll give you about a minute to select your action steps, put them in order, and assign due dates. All right, I know that was not nearly enough time. It was about 60 seconds, and you don't have a whole plan, but if you have some additional action steps, you're going to be much more likely to take action and launch with something after you attend this presentation today, which is my hope. And if you want to take it one step further, I can be your accountability partner and send you email reminders for each of your tasks. So go ahead, if you want to, and email me, Kirsten, Kirsten, at illuminationcoaching.com. Send me your 3 steps with your due dates, and I'm going to send you reminders. Happy to do that. Finally, here's some resources I'd like to leave with you today. I have recently written during this year 2 articles for Forbes Coaches Council on 7 reasons your leadership development program is failing you, part 1 and part 2, which also has some great, some items I mentioned today and some additional ones as well. And also there's the case study that I mentioned on Deltek's leadership development program. Both the design and implementation, I think, is really well done. Just about a 3-page article. It's really, it's got a lot of gold in there too. So I encourage you to access that as well. And if for some reason you're not an ATD member and you find that that content is locked, you can always email me and I can send that to you as well. So just know that that's always available if you can't find those resources. And finally, I'd love to thank you for your attention and engagement today. I know it's a bit trickier since we're doing this virtually and it's not nearly as much fun as doing it live, where we can break up, move around the room, have small group discussions, but we're making the most of it, right? That's what we're doing. And I look forward to answering your questions during the Q&A time in just a moment. But before we head there, please reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn, Kirsten Menegello at LinkedIn. I'm always sharing leadership development tips, and I love to learn from one another. There's always stuff that I'm learning every day on LinkedIn. You can also sign up for my monthly email newsletter, which has great leadership development tips in it. It only comes out once per month, and I will never sell or share your information, guaranteed. And finally, if you'd like to learn more about our leadership and team development services, pop on over to illuminationcoaching.com to learn more. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you in a minute.